What up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Let's Ask Paul, the podcast where you get to ask me, Paul Abernathy, anything you want about the National Electrical Code and all things electrically related. Thanks for taking the time to listen to this podcast. You know, our podcasts, we have literally thousands of episodes of our podcast available on your favorite listening platform, whatever platform you're listening on right now. But you also can listen on our free mobile app. So all you got to do is go to our website. It is Fast Tracks, that's T-R-A-X, by the way, Fast Tracks System, SYSTEM.com. And in the navigational bar, you will see where it says mobile app. You simply go there, and if you're on your phone, you just simply tap on the link, and it'll ask you to download it on your phone, and you just do it. If you're on your desktop, you can go there, and you'll see a QR code, and you pull out your phone, scan the QR code, boom, it'll load it on your phone. Now, we're not going to download anything into your phone. We're only going to put a web-based link, kind of like clicking on a link to get to a website. All of our apps are in the cloud. Now, I made that decision years ago when I shifted away from the Wix stuff, and we started doing our own because I did not want to put stuff on your phone. But I wanted to give you an instant link. So it acts like a mobile app. It works like a mobile app. It has all the features of a mobile app, but it doesn't install garbage into your device. And I am big against those type of things. I do not want that on my phone, and I certainly would not want that on your phone. So again, check it out. It's available over on fasttracksystem.com. And if you get the mobile app, you can actually listen to our podcast directly from the mobile app. And you can even stream it to any of your Bluetooth connected devices. I listen to one of my Bluetooth devices in the shower. I connect it from my phone. I happen to listen to Spotify because I listen to a lot of entrepreneurial type of podcasts and things like that. So I actually will stream it to that Bluetooth device. Well, you could do the same thing with our podcast. And so, yeah, easy peasy. You can also listen on any of your favorite platforms, Spreaker, Spotify, Deezer, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, any of those. All you got to do is just search for Master the NEC podcast or Let's Ask Paul podcasts. And usually you're going to hear all of the Let's Ask Pauls also on Master the NEC podcast. So that's probably the best one to get, and that's on more platforms. So check it out. And do me a favor, give a thumbs up, give a like, share it with other people, show some love, again, for the effort, right? There's a lot of people that can be haters out there, but the problem with them is they don't do anything but spew hate. I don't see them making videos. I don't see them doing shows. I don't see them doing podcasts. They talk a lot of garbage, but they don't do anything. They don't give back, okay? So at the end of the day, I'm on all types of social media. I don't shy away from it. I teach people on Coffee Hour every morning at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. Hopefully you'll join me on all of our social platforms. So at the end of the day, it's about making good electricians great electricians. But it's also about taking sucky electricians and making them better too, okay? Because we got our share of those out there. All you got to do is spend a little time on social media. You will find out pretty quickly there are some sucky electricians out there. But there's also some great ones out there, okay? So anyway, let's get into today. So what we're going to do today is I do have some questions that were submitted to me from the Let's Ask Paul podcast, which, by the way, you can actually submit your questions to me for free. All you got to do is go to paulabernathy.com. It's a simple portal sponsored by Wix. You put in your name, email address, and then you put in your question. Please be as detailed as possible. Let me know what code cycle you're on so that I can make sure that my responses are tailored to the NEC cycle that you're using, because I don't want to assume anything, but be as detailed as you can. The vaguer you are, then the vaguer response that you're going to get, okay? All right. So let's see here. I have a question that was submitted. Let me see if I can pull it up here. All right, here's the first question that we have. Now, let me also make sure that I get the code book here because, again, I might need to make some reference to the NEC, so I want to make sure that I do that. Okay. All right, here's the first one of the day. It says, Paul, my question has to do with SER cable and when people sleeve it with PVC for protection and through an LB into the structure. It says people always strip the sheathing to run it in the conduit. is this a code violation? And also from a manufacturer's perspective, which obviously he knows that I work for a large manufacturer, and also am a patent holder of a product that is both SER and tray cables. So this is a very, I'm a good person to ask this question, by the way. Now, I don't speak for all manufacturers. I'm just going to be generic when it comes to a wiring cable response, but it's a good question for somebody like me to answer. He also goes and says, is this against their installation guidelines? And that's talking about manufacturers. It says, I've always considered this a violation of 110.3b, but maybe I'm wrong. Look forward to hearing your take on this, and thank you in advance. Okay, great question. As always, I've got some of the greatest followers in the world. They send me questions. I noticed this gentleman right here actually comes to our coffee hours. I won't say his name. Now, if you do send me a question at paulabernathy.com and you want me to shout out your name, just let me know. Otherwise, I'll keep it anonymous. That way, you never know who's listening or whatnot. But if you don't care and you want me to do a shout out, just let me know. I'll shout out. Ain't no hater on that, buddy. All right, let's talk about SER cable. Okay, so service entrance cable. SER is just one version. The R stands for round. You have the SEU. The U stands for unguarded. Okay, which basically is two conductors and a helical third conductor. It does not have to be made that way. It could be three separate conductors in there. It's just that it's typically SEU is what you would see from outside from your, let's say, weatherhead down to the meter, line side of a meter, right? And then from the load side of a meter down to, if you're dwelling, it'd be to the emergency disconnect, right? Or service disconnect if they're both there. So the question is with that is, does it have to be the helical? No, it doesn't have to be. It could be round as well. People don't understand that. It's just a choice from manufacturers to use the U style that basically looks like a beefier non-metallic sheath cable. That's basically what it looks like, a beefier non-metallic sheath cable with a gray sheathing on it, okay? That's not industry standard either. That's just what all of us do. They put the gray sheathing on top of it. And then we wrap the conductors, wrap around everything with a fiberglass, what's called a binder. That is required by UL 854 to have that fiberglass binder, okay? Way more information that you probably wanted, but I figured, what the hell, I'll share it with you. Okay, so next, manufacturer specific. If you're a manufacturer and you actually mark the conductors that are actually in your cable, then stripping out the sheathing is going to be okay as long as those conductors are marked. Right? So in that scenario, as long as you're meeting all the marking requirements that are found in the National Electrical Code, then that is not going to be any issue. That if you follow all the requirements for 310.8 of the NEC, the marking, it says all conductors and cables. Now, some cables require the marking. For example, non-metallic sheath cable. Typically, we put the marking on the sheathing. We don't put any marking on the conductors inside of it, which means, number one, you couldn't strip that sheathing off and use those conductors inside because they don't have the markings that are required by 310.8a, okay? Now, we're permitted to put it on the sheathing and let that be it because that's assembly. You're not supposed to break the assembly apart. However, if I were to label those conductors properly, as if they were individual single insulated conductors, then it would be no different than our MC cable. So MC cable, typically you don't strip out the conductors unless those conductors are marked. And they're marked, then I can use a transition fitting and go from the MC over to whatever other wiring method that I'm installing them in. That type of thing. You with me? Okay, so that is the concept. Now, when it comes to SER, not all manufacturers will mark the conductors inside of that cable assembly. Most of them, not all, most of the manufacturers will because they're using the same inner conductors, the single insulated conductors inside of it. They're using the exact same ones they would if they sold it on a reel that you would pull into a raceway. And it's simply because of time. Why make something separate? Okay, we do that for NM, but why do that for an SC when basically we just want to take conductors that are off of a reel that have already been marked that we could have sold for use in a raceway, but we also just take them and use them in a cable assembly. When you find a manufacturer that does not mark their conductors in an SE cable, then obviously stripping off the sheathing would not permit you to use those conductors because they would be outside of the sheathing, and that would be a violation of 110.3b, okay? Because you want to use the product as it's intended. And then next, the conductors, you wouldn't be able to read any markings, so that would be a violation, again, of 310.8, all right? Now, let's say that you do put the markings on it. One of the things that people don't realize is that if I had an SE cable, I am okay to take an SER and sleeve it inside of a raceway. Now, if it's a complete system, means in this case, they made reference to an LB. If it's not for physical damage and it goes from point A to point B, then it's going to have to be a raceway fill calculation is going to have to take place. And it's a cable, and you treat it like it's a single insulated conductor. And it's a big one, but that's how you treat it, and you can fill that raceway up to 53%. That tells us that in Chapter 9, Table 1, and then you go down to the notes. It tells us that. I can't remember. I think it's Note 9. So anyway, but you also have a Note 2 which says, you know what? You don't have to worry about the raceway fill if all you're doing is putting that SE cable in this raceway to protect it from something. So that's a difference between a complete system, whereas you have a raceway that's from box to box or box to cabinet, and you're just putting the cable inside of it. That's a complete system. Then you're going to have to do a raceway fill calc. If you're just sleeving it through a short piece of raceway and you're doing it for protection, and again, that's not defined. In EC, we don't say what's physical damage, what's severe physical damage. That's something you work out with your AHJ. But if you're doing it for the reason to protect it, then at the end of the day, you don't have to meet the raceway fill, okay? Now, trust me, I'm building up to this. So that covers that aspect of the question. So now, what about the concept of going from, let's say, transitioning into a raceway, which would turn into an LB? So you are required, when you go from one wiring method to another wiring method, to have a transition, okay? So this is an example where if you were to go from MC cable and you had conductors inside of it that were marked, it's very common for people to do stub ups in buildings, and they'll go up and they'll change over between MC over to an EMT fitting. Well, if the conductors itself are marked, then they can, once they enter that EMT, they're just used as regular conductors. But you have to have a proper listed .6 listing, okay, .6 of 330, for example, for MC. The fitting that transitions between MC and EMT, the transition between two different wiring methods, has to be a listed fitting for transitioning, okay? Not something you cobble together with a coupling and some connectors, okay? It's a transition fitting. They're available. You know, whether you want to pay for them or whether you want to hunt them down, that's up to you. I'm not here to get into that. You can have that argument with your AHJ. I'm just telling you there are transition fittings, okay? So when I go, for example, with NM cable, and I'm in an unfinished basement, and I'm going to sleeve it down a raceway that's exposed, that's mounted on the surface, the code is very clear of how I enter that, okay? But I'm going to run the cable all the way down and into the box, because I know that stripping that off would be a violation because there is no marking on the NM cable. So when it comes to the SE cable, can I just run it into the LB? Not if I don't have a transition fitting. So the best thing you can do is leave the sheathing on it and run it all the way in. If you're going to run it into a raceway, leave the sheathing on it, run it all the way till it gets to the end and have at least 1/4 of an inch sticking into whatever you're running it into, and then strip it. There is no reason for you to have to take off the sheathing. If you do have a transition fitting, and you can transition from SER that has the markings on the conductors inside of it, and you have a transition fitting that allows me to transition from a cable assembly to another wiring method, then as long as those conductors are marked, you're okay. Go for it. I don't get the sense of that in your question. So I would say it depends on whether the conductors are marked inside of that SC, okay? If they're not marked, then it would be a violation to strip it out. If they are marked, as long as you're using a proper transition fitting to go from one wiring method to another, then I don't see any problem with it at all. Now, can I control what people are going to do? I know that there are people that are going to just strip it and do what they want to do, and that's you do you, boo. I'm just telling you, this is the proper way it's addressed in the National Electrical Code. You need to have a proper fitting that's one listed for the SER, and also transitions in the fitting would also be listed for the EMT, if that is what you're transitioning to. And that'd be the same whether it was Schedule 80, Schedule 40, PVC, or what have you. That type of scenario. You get me? Okay. So hopefully that answers that question for you. And I gave you probably way more information that you wanted on that episode, okay? Now, when it comes to the last part of your question, though, about manufacturers' instructions, that type of thing, I remind you that as manufacturers, we don't really tell you how to install the product, and none of our recommendations are part of a listing. So we're not going to tell you how to use the SC cable. We're going to tell you to follow the National Electrical Code. That's what we're going to tell you. If we give you an installation guide, typically that has nothing to do with the listing. That is something that a manufacturer has drawn up to help you. But not doing it per our guide does not violate anything. It's just something that a manufacturer may produce. It's not part of the listing. So for SE cables, for example, we're not going to submit anything into the listing about the installation practice. We're going to leave that to the National Electrical Code, okay? Hope that makes sense. Okay, let's see here. We have another question that was submitted. Darlene highlighted this one. It says, Paul, I have a question. On your coffee hour show, can you go over torquing large and small breakers? Lug torquing, how to use the annex. Should the torque tool be certified? Keeping the cert with the tool for anyone in case anyone should ask. I want my crew to understand the NEC rules. Okay, great question. Again, torquing. I get quite a bit of questions that are, about things like torquing. So the first thing that I guess that I will tell you is that anybody that's trying to do a little more on torquing has to go look at 110.14d. And it has changed between 2020 and 2023 a little bit, in a sense that it's kind of lightened up a little bit on the reference to things like a calibrated torquing tool, which is just one way to verify torquing. But previous to the 2023, it kind of implied that was the only way to do it. And that's really not the case. We have other things like shear bolts or breakaway style devices that once they get to a certain value, that they'll break, whether it's inch pounds, foot pounds, whatever it is on the equipment you're doing, that they will break. So you can buy that. So it didn't make sense to mandate a calibrated torquing tool, as basically gave the impression that was the only way to do it. That isn't the only way to do it. There are other things that are out there. So when it comes to the 2023 edition of the NEC, they kind of clarified that and said, look, and I'm quoting now from the code, it says, tightening torque values for terminal connections shall be as indicated on the equipment or in installation instructions provided by the manufacturer. Okay, it says, an approved means shall be used to achieve the indicated torque value. So there's a torque value. It's going to be on the machine. It's going to be on the equipment, going to be on their installation instructions that come with it. In other words, telling you what to torque it at. Again, cable, as you heard earlier, we don't make installation instructions for SC cable. However, manufacturers of terminals, manufacturers of panel boards, other equipment, they do, because they use different things that it's real important that you install it within the perimeters of their piece of equipment. So for torquing values, they will give you values, whether it's inch pounds or foot pounds, and it'll put it right on the piece of equipment, or it might be even on the device itself. Okay. It could be on the box for the device, anything like that. They'll give you values. So when it comes to the National Electrical Code's view on it, okay, if it's indicated on the equipment, that's what you torque it to. If it's in the instructions for that specific piece of equipment where it does have such information, then you follow it because it's provided by the manufacturer. In fact, that's going to be part of its listing. Whereas, remember I told you for SC cable, we don't do any of that. There's nothing that we submit with our cable. Nothing we submit with our conductors, to be honest with you. You install them in other different wiring methods, all right? But once you enter into equipment, then you follow the rules of the NEC. And if the manufacturer of the equipment, say a service switchgear or a panel board or whatnot, or load center, they're going to give you instructions for terminating our conductors onto those devices. And they're going to give you a value to torque it at. Now, you probably didn't realize that there's torque values on receptacles, there's torque values on switches, there are torque values on splicing devices, Polaris splices. There's torque values on many things. Now, there's also torque values on things like MC connectors, AC connectors, all this stuff. Many people don't follow those type of things. They don't really pay any attention to it, but you really do follow it more than you probably know when it comes to things like feeders and service conductors and things like that, or terminating onto breakers, overcurrent protective devices. You have a torque value that you got to achieve there. And then many people probably just tighten it down as tight as they can. Now, that can make a difference whether you're dealing with copper or aluminum. Aluminum is is not as hard as copper, so it's not as forgiving as it would be for copper, although both can crush very easily. So you have to follow torque values. And tighter does not always mean better, okay? Just important thing to remember that whether it's copper or aluminum, you have a certain level of creep. You have a certain level of relaxation from compression. And again, depending on how badly you compress it and how it's going to affect the lugging, the termination, and whether that reliefs a little bit and you get an arc in there and the product doesn't recover the same. Again, you have to be very careful. And that's why torquing is so important. Now, it's probably less impactful for people on devices. For example, receptacles, if you backstab a 14 gauge into a 15 amp rated receptacle that allows backstabbing, then you ain't got to worry about torquing values. Even if you hate backstabbing, you don't have to worry about it. But if you use the screws on the side, you better worry about it. Now, do you worry about it? Do you use a torquing screwdriver every time? Probably not. And I'm not here to badger you about it and preach to you about it. You do you, boo. You do what you want to do. But at the end of the day, if you see a torque value on something, you're supposed to be torquing it to that value. That's what the manufacturers have submitted, okay? Now, in the previous code cycle, when it made reference to calibrated torquing tool, that really caused a bunch of ripples through the inspection industry. They were like, well, how the hell do I make sure that this is done? I mean, do a calibrated tool? Do I have to have a certificate showing a current calibration? Do I have to see that before every job? How do I know they did? They're just showing me a piece of paper. How do I know they actually torqued it right? All those type of things caused quite a bit of a stir. And so the only thing that's really changed here is that a calibrated torquing tool is just one approved method by the AHJ. There are other approved methods. Now, the informational note in 110.14d makes it very clear. It says examples of approved means for achieving the indicated torque value include torquing tools or devices such as shear bolts or breakaway style devices with visual indicators that demonstrate that the proper torque has been applied. That type of thing, right? So it's one of those things where people are like, okay, I understand it. Now, before 110.14 came into play, okay, so that's where we'll go next. People say, well, what happened before 110.14 came into play? Because that was the big deal where people were looking at it going, well, this didn't come into play until it was adopted, right? And one of the things that I think is important is to realize that the calibrated torquing tool requirement actually disappeared in the 2020. They put in some values and they add some words, they add approved means. This is not new, folks. This was in the 2020 edition. So the calibrated torquing tool was all the way back in the 2017 and people freaked out. That's not the case. So it's been removed, that part about it. But people say, well, what happened before we got 110.14? Well, before 110.14d, the reference that you would have used was 110.3b. Because if the manufacturer gives you a product and they post a torquing value on the side of the product, then you're forced to follow it, right? I'm just saying that's what you're supposed to do, right? So we could argue that it was a violation of 110.3b to not, because what does 110.3b say? It says equipment, and then under the 2020 code, it says equipment that is listed, labeled, or both shall be installed and used in accordance with any instructions included in the listing and labeling. Now remember, we don't give you that information for wiring cable, okay? We don't give you that. We just say follow the NEC. But there are plenty of manufacturers for different things that have torquing that's required. They will specifically give you values. And this is the way it's always been. But it was under 110.3b when they required it. It just didn't really get broader for everybody until the introduction of 110.14d. And then people were like, oh, I get it. That type of thing. So that's the thing. So you're required to torque it. Now, how to deal with it? Here's how I deal with it, to be honest with you, because I know, and I tell this to people all the time, I know that you're not going to be torquing every screwdriver, every screw on a switch or a device. I get it. And as an inspector, I am probably not, I don't have the time to check all those, right? But you should be doing your service connections. You should be doing all feeder connections. You should make sure you own a torquing wrench and a torque screwdriver. I'm not saying this to increase the stock of Husky, okay? I'm just saying, hell, go buy one at Harbor Freight. They're fine. It's fine. People, Harbor Freight's too cheap. Dude, it's fine. Relax. So at the end of the day, it's having some way to show the inspector. Now, again, what I used to tell people was, the inspector doesn't have time to look at everything. So if you know your guys are torquing and doing it properly and following everything, then at that point, one of the things that you could do is an affidavit stating you as the whoever's in charge of the job, the chief electrician, the head electrician, the lead guy, whatever, stating that you're telling the AHJ that you have personally witnessed or that you know that all of the terminations are torqued in accordance with 110.3b and 110.14d. And give that to the inspector and let that be part of the record. That type of scenario, if that makes you feel better. If the inspector wants to check everything, did you know that there's a misconception that if I torque something at 35 inch-pounds or foot-pounds, whatever, depending on, or 150 foot-pounds or 35 inch-pounds, whatever it is, or typically we're talking more like 4 to 6 inch-pounds, and then we're talking foot-pounds when we get a lot higher. Either way, when you do that, you remember that even if they come back to test it later, you're not going to over-tighten it because you're going to set the torquing device, if they want to check you, at the value that you say you torqued it at. And it should snap at or about that value. It's certainly not going to put any more damage to it. It's not going to tighten it any tighter unless you just got a total malfunctioned tool, right? So typically it should snap anyway. That's not going to cause any undue damage. But tightening it and trying to make it as tight as you can is not the answer. Everything just needs to be torqued properly. So if I was giving you some advice on the process, then what I would say is get your folks used to using them, having them, whatever they want to use, whatever design they want to use. If they want to use a calibrated torquing tool, that's fine. It no longer says that it has to be calibrated. Okay, the AHJ could accept it even if it's an uncalibrated torquing tool. But at the end of the day, it's one of those things where I would get used to doing services. I would do feeder connections. If you're in a panel, I would do breakers, and I would do lugs and terminations onto the bus bars. I would do that while I'm in the panel. Okay, you can get torquing screwdrivers today that are just they work just like an 8-in-1, if you will, same kind of concept, and they do fine. A Husky one, I love my Husky. It works fine, and I use it in the panel. I can't say I use it out in with receptacles and switches. Okay, I'm not going to be a hypocrite here. I just don't. I don't go that tight anyway. But at the end of the day, I do use it on panels when I'm working in a panel or something like that. So again, that would be a good start. That would be a good start. Okay. All right. All right. Hopefully that answers your question. Oh, you asked about the informative annex. I think that you did ask about that. So what he's talking about there is how to apply the informative annex. So in your code, you have what's called an informative annex I. It's not enforceable. It's not part of any. It's not part of any requirement, but it is extracted information. Okay, that comes out of UL. So it's out of UL 486A-486B. Okay. So a manufacturer, for example, could cite this as where they get their torque values depending on the different type of screw or whatever, or tightening torque for slotted head screws or all those type of things. So if you can't find any information from a manufacturer and you can't find any information on the equipment, then this is an example where it may be acceptable, and the AHJ has got to show a little leeway to say, you know what, will you let me use these values based on the UL standard? And all that's in the NEC is just a regurgitated copy and paste. It's just really all part of a UL standard, but it just means that I don't have to go buy the UL 486 standard to do this because those standards are expensive, okay? So at the end of the day, if you don't have proper information from a manufacturer and you don't have it posted on the equipment, in the absence of a manufacturer's instructions, then basically the torque values given in the tables that are in the informative annex I, okay, these little tables are recommended because it's all based on documented information out of UL Underwriters Laboratory. Now, I can tell you point blank, I don't know of any case except for really old equipment that I ever had to do that. I could easily get it from the manufacturer or it was posted in the equipment, that type of thing. But maybe you're working on something old, the labels are old and worn, and you're adding another circuit to an old panel and you can't find this information. And maybe that company originally is not in business anymore and you've got to make some good sound judgments. Then possibly I would use these tables in an informative annex I, and I would present this to the AHJ and say, look, this is all we got, man. He's certainly not going to make you change the whole panel or something because of this. He's like, dude, this is all I got. So this is what I have to use. It makes sense to me, that type of thing. Also be aware that some companies that may be out of business may be absorbed by other companies, like Schneider may have absorbed other companies. Okay. I don't know whether you know that or not, but Schneider still makes the slotted style Federal Pacific that's used in Canada. They still make that design. I hear a lot of negative stuff about the design, but stab lock, but it's still being made, still used in other countries. But at the end of the day, because that company bought something, you might be able to reach out to their technical support and they may be able to give you that additional information so that you can torque it properly, that type of thing. That's all we're saying, okay? All right, so that is it for that. Hopefully that gave you some guidance on how to do it. I would teach my guys to torque all service conductors, all feeder conductors, and then anything within an enclosure that has a stamped torque value on it, then I would do that. Now, when it comes to the other stuff like switches and receptacles and connectors and fittings, use your best judgment on that. Again, steer away from tightening it down until you get white knuckles. Let's put it that way, okay? But make it tight, and we'll kind of the best way they can do it. Now, if you want to be a purist, then buy them a torquing screwdriver and torquing wrenches and say, this is the only one you're going to use. Okay? We'll see how long that works out. But at the end of the day, that's the best advice I can give you. Okay? All right. That's it, folks. That's all we're going to do for today's episode. We covered 2 of them. It's been a while since we've done some Let's Ask Pauls. So hopefully you enjoy these. If you want to submit something to me, all you've got to do is go to paulabernathy.com. That's PaulAbernathy, folks. Go there, send me the question. I love hearing, but you can use that portal to send me anything you want. You want to send me kudos? You want to do some donations because you appreciate what we do? There's a donate button there. Feel free to donate whatever you want. We appreciate you, folks. Hopefully you got something out of today's episode. Till next time, stay safe. God bless.